Hello. What did Byron and Caitlin advise Joe to do? In episode 4. Joe informed Byron Westfield and Caitlin Meade that Josefina spoke Spanish and was aware her father and uncle were running a cartel. Byron and Caitlin informed Joe that her Lioness could not be trusted and that she would have to ensure that she did not backstab them at the last minute. How to keep Josefina from defecting was beyond Joe's knowledge. Byron recommended that they send another individual to shadow her and accompany her at all times. Joe was adamantly opposed to planting a shadow to keep an eye on the Lioness since it would undermine the very purpose of Josefina's mission. It was critical to be covert and not reveal their plans to the enemy. But Byron was insistent, telling Joe that if a shadow was present, they would be able to mitigate the damage. Joe had battled hard to secure her boss's clearance for the mission, and now that she was ready to begin an operation, she didn't want to deal with any needless complications. Joe was out of options, and she, too, couldn't think of a better solution. Joe had someone in mind whom she wanted to have on the team and assigned to shadow Josefina. What did Gutierrez want from Joe? In Lioness episode 4, Joe sensed someone was following her automobile. She contacted Kyle and explained the issue. Kyle was also keeping track of Joe's movements, which annoyed her. Kyle said the mission's sensitivity and their enemy's audacity forced him to do so. Joe and Kyle decided to approach the automobile following the former and confront him face to face. Kyle ran the number plate and discovered that the Lincoln that followed Joe's automobile belonged to a man named Randall Newman, who had previously negotiated an immunity bargain with the U.S. Attorney's Office. This man was involved in a money laundering case in 2021 and was represented by the DEA. It was evident that the man who was following Joe wanted them to know who he was. He wanted them to face him. Joe and Kyle discovered that this individual was a DEA agent named Gutierrez, and his main reason for following Joe was to be a part of the overall objective. He reminded her that without the DEA's help, she would endanger the lives of her whole crew. He told her about the types of individuals she was dealing with and the drastic measures they may take if things didn't go their way. Joe clearly did not want an outsider to be part of the CIA mission, but Byron and Caitlin persuaded her otherwise. Byron informed her that every other agency wanted a piece of the pie, not because they wanted to fight for their country but just to grow their annual budgets. The agencies were aware of the high stakes, they knew what kind of recognition they would receive if the mission was successful. Joe disliked the type of sacrifice she was being pushed to make. She didn't want a shadow to be planted, and she also didn't want a DEA agent on her squad. But, once again, she was left with little options and agreed to hire Gutierrez. Why did Joe go to meet Cruz? Cruz Manuelos made a comeback in Lioness Season 2, Episode 4, when Joe went to meet her. Joe needed someone to shadow Josefina, and Cruz was the only person she trusted. She knew Cruz was the type of person who emphasized her duty to the nation over everything else. Cruz was startled to discover Joe in her home. Her heart fell as she realized why she'd come there. Joe told her what she expected from her, and Cruz couldn't understand why, of all people, she had picked her alone. Joe informed her right away that it was a sensitive vision, and despite their differences, he thought Cruz was the finest candidate for the job. Joe informed Cruz that she might curse her for what she had done to her, but she had saved a lot of people's lives. Joe informed Cruz that since Amrohai, the number of terrorist acts had decreased dramatically. Cruz understood how Joe worked, and when she saw her at her house, she knew she couldn't say no to her. Cruz packed her luggage and prepared for action. Now, I feel that deep down, she wanted to be a part of such a project, despite her apparent hatred for Joe. Cruz hoped to make a difference. She wanted to rescue lives and fight for her nation, and being a part of Joe's mission provided her the opportunity. What did Joe find at the warehouse? Gutierrez informed Joe of a warehouse located around 30 miles south of the U.S.-Mexico border, where he felt some unusual activity was occurring. Joe hesitated to attack the warehouse because she didn't know what was happening or who was visiting. Joe launched the satellites and used them to collect data in the target area. Joe and her crew defeated the target and stormed into the storehouse. They were astounded to discover hundreds of ladies and young girls inside the building. Joe became numb for a moment, and she wasn't sure what to do next. Josefina informed Joe that local cops were approaching them. Joe requested she take them out because they didn't have much of an alternative. Joe instructed her crew to evacuate the premises and depart from there. It was apparent that the cartel was engaged in human trafficking. The young girls were being transported from Mexico to the United States, and Joe realized the cartel was more than just about narcotics. This discovery at the end of Season 2, Episode 4, will have a significant impact on events. Jo will probably have to adjust her strategy and find a method to save those girls. There was far more at stake than Jo had realized. It would be fascinating to watch how Jo handles the situation and whether she is successful in trapping Josefina's uncle and father. Thank you for watching.